So I said that I was in love with a boy, and there was nothing more than that. And then a few months later, I said,
Welcome to Teaching While Queer, where we are providing queer folks working in education with a community to feel less alone and unload the burden of identity politics so you can work and live as your authentic self. I'm your host, Brian Stanton. My pronouns are he, they. I am a theater pedagogue and educator in New York City, and I am so pleased to have you here. Please enjoy Teaching While Queer. Through our conversation today, you will discover how embracing a spectrum of queerness can enrich your personal growth, the importance of supporting others while respecting their boundaries, and practical advice for advocating for inclusivity in education and beyond. Hi, Vin Phillips. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I am so great and so excited to be able to sit down with you. Can you tell everybody who's listening a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Vin Phillips. I go by he, him. I am adopted from Vietnam with Cambodian roots, but I grew up in Sweden, and that's where I am at the moment.
I love that. I haven't interviewed anybody from Sweden or anybody who is from Vietnam, so that's pretty fantastic. I'm excited to have you on. Given that you've got such a multicultural background, what was life like for you as a queer student?
It was very different, I think, because for me, the culture thing happened first, not my queer thing. I was always comfortable being, I was queer, and I came out when I was 11. And for me, it was felt natural to be queer and express my queerness. But for me, being adopted from another society, from another culture, it was more of a challenge in the society for me.
That's so interesting. Did you feel like anything changed as far as how you expressed your queerness as a child when you moved?
I came to Sweden, I was half year. So
Oh, gotcha. So you were a baby when you came to Sweden, and so you grew up in a different culture from your birth, but were comfortable being your queer self starting at age 11, which is wild to me. I came out where I was outed at age 14, so it's not that far off, but to be able to have that terminology and the ability to express who you are that young is just so wonderful. I'm happy for you.
like, I think I didn't know I was a queer. For me, it was normal. Everyone said, "Oh, I am in love with a girl. I'm in love with a boy." Because back then we only used two genders for some reason. And because I'm born 1995, so this was like 2006. And I said that I was in love with a boy, and there was nothing more than that. And then a few months later, I said I was in love with a girl and had a girlfriend. But now I think that, yeah, I'm probably gay. I don't know. I don't put so much value to it.
I appreciate
But it
it.
was definitely like a different, my queerness was different in different parts of my life, how I expressed it.
I think that's why I enjoy the term queer, is because it is a spectrum. It is very various options without having to say one specific thing, because I agree with you that at different times of my life I've been attracted to different people. And those different people run the spectrum of gender. It's not, I think that sexuality is something that's more on a spectrum where in reality we're falling for the person and not the body.
Yeah, I agree. And for me also, I did my bachelor degree in gender studies.
Cool.
Yeah, and I did that very much more to get to know myself, to be more authentic with myself. And also that's when I learned about intersectionality and like how you mix, like how the gender and the sexuality and how race and class and everything intersect with each other. And I think that's very interesting to talk about that, because we're not one person all the time throughout life, because it's like a dynamic.
I think that's a funny thing to really express, in the sense that so many people will tag on to something that someone else said 20 years ago, and they're like, they said this 20 years ago, and I'm like, but they're not saying that now. Shouldn't they grow? I had an argument with someone recently where they're like, Joe Biden used to be anti-gay, and I was like, but he's not right now. Aren't we supposed to grow and change? And shouldn't it not be like a stagnant box that we're saying, okay, I'm 11 and here, this is who I am, and that's who I am for the rest of my life? That doesn't allow for maturity.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's why sometimes I speak from myself and how I feel or identify now. I might say, this is what I feel now. This is what I am now. I don't know for the future, because I want to have space for me to grow however I want to grow. And I
I
think we
love
should
that.
hold space for other people too.
Yeah, I love that so much. The idea of this is who I am right now. And I think that more people should probably embrace that kind of concept because
Yeah.
you do really limit yourself when you say, this is who I am. And that's it. Like, this is who I am. And there's no changing that. And I especially get frustrated when people are like, they're of a different generation. Okay, that's fine. But they can grow. Human beings can grow and learn things. And because they can grow and learn, they have the capacity to change.
And I think that's what I also like with queerness, because being outside the norm gives so much more space to think outside the box. So you can maybe question more things in society and question yourself and see other way of living and what you feel like. And I think it's beautiful.
I think that's beautiful also. I was just thinking as you were talking about how a lot of folks would focus on that like negative of being different or being outside of the norm, but you just said something so wonderful, which is it gives you more freedom. And I think that's absolutely correct.
Don't get me wrong, I got bullied as well for being queer. But, and I don't say we don't experience negative things, but we also can take power for ourselves and take responsibility for what choices we make and actions we make for ourselves to feel better in the environment we are in.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. So let's talk about your work in education. What do you do in education, and how does your experience from being a queer child kind of inform your work in education?
For me, being a queer child was rough, not rough, but it was strange when I came out because I didn't know it was going to be such a big thing. I was just like in love with a boy, and I was a boy, so like no biggie for me. But then all the teachers in the secondary school had a meeting with how to handle this kind of thing. How should you talk to me? What should we do? Because I never experienced it before. And but after that, when I get into high school and uni, I always was open queer, and all my teachers always so supportive, and I always looked up to them because I knew I could go to them if I needed some support. Even if I didn't need support, it was like somehow safety for me. And that's something I take with me in my life when I educate people, to be support for other people if they need me to be, but also not trying to push my support on them if they don't need it or don't want it.
I think that right there is a key distinction that a lot of people need to learn to pick up on, is to support when it's needed, but not to force support when someone doesn't want it. Like, someone has to be willing to accept your help.
Yeah. So that's also what I take with me, is like to be a better listener and not talker. So I can listen to see where they are at. So I can like change my communication or like the tools I'm using to get through to them on their level, because that's why I'm there in the first hand, I think.
Absolutely. And so, thinking about your experiences, what kind of things do you do when you're confronted with anti-queer behavior?
I think it depends on what circumstance it is and how safe it is. And normally I try to speak up, but if I also feel that they get defensive very fast, I might not speak anymore because I don't think it's a space to have a conversation. So it really depends on how much energy you take from me and how much energy you would give. So if they are a space where they can get that, what I'm trying to get through to them, then I would speak up. But I think you should choose your battles.
Absolutely. And I have a question that I did not prep you for. So, are you okay with me asking one off the cuff?
Of course, it's okay.
So we've seen around the world that different countries are having this kind of conservative push from a extreme right perspective. Do you see the same thing happening in Sweden?
Both yes and no. In the Swedish election, we saw it. So we have a very right-wing party in supporting the parliament now, like the government, because we don't have two sides. We have like many different small parties in Sweden. So it's very different from the United States.
Yeah, we're supposed to have many different small parties, but for some reason we're stuck with this. The dominant two parties have just been ruling since the existence of this country, and that drives me nuts. Let's use the system way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Lots of options, like what you've got going on in Sweden. Lots of parties involved.
Yeah, it's good and bad. Sometimes we don't have a government for a few months because we don't find collaborations between the parties. And sometimes, but I think collaboration is always good. I think that's what we need in society. But also with the right wing, we also see the left wing now in the European election. We had a left wing coming from Sweden instead.
What is that, having someone that's more on the left-wing side of things? Do you think that it is a radical move, or is it something that seems more moderate?
It's not like I think the Swedish politics is not so left or right as other countries. It's still very much in the middle. Swedes are not taking that much of chances doing too risky moves. We always want to be in the middle and neutral, as we say, although we are not. But yeah.
I get that 100%. And it's funny because when you look at the scale, like an actual political scale of government and whatnot, from right wing extreme to left wing extreme, I think that for the majority of the US, we have spent a lot of time in that middle also. And so it's interesting that there's one side that's pushing more extreme than the other, where it's like a bunch of people trying to tug this side back to the middle. And so I'd be intrigued to see what happens if people started stepping into more of a liberal left-wing feel, maybe not going to the extreme, but if this is the middle and this is the extreme, then finding that other point that's between those two that pushes us further in the direction of, I don't know, doing what's right for human beings.
Yeah, but I think that's why there's so many small parties in Sweden too, because those small parties can still push a little bit to not be too much in the middle. Yeah, I think it's a great thing. But also see like various, like I don't work in school. I work in the civil society for non-profit organizations. That's where I educate people. And we see a lot about the civil society, like a force coming towards pushing against the right wings. And I think it's very beautiful how organizations are trying to come together.
Absolutely. I think that the more we can work together, the better the world's going to be, just in general. It's just trying to get people to sit and have a conversation without attacking one another. That is, it's becoming harder and harder to do for some reason. Thinking about being authentic, and you were perfectly comfortable being your little queer self, it was the teachers who were like, oh, I don't know how to deal with this. So if you were to talk to someone who's just starting out their career and they are worried about being their authentic self at work, what kind of things would you give them, or what kind of advice would you give them?
Firstly, I haven't always been openly queer at my workplace. It depends on where I've been working, I think, and also what stages in my life and other things happening in my life. So I think my advice would be that you should do it for yourself and not from other people. I know that sometimes if being queer, some people expect from us speaking up for other queer people and for us to take the fight. And I understand that, to use other voices for the good and stuff. But you also need to think about how it affects your mental health and if you are capable, if you're in that space at the moment. So it's definitely okay to not be too authentic in workspace, I think, if you're not there. But if you feel that you want to, then I think you should do it. So it depends, reflect on it by yourself, I think.
Absolutely. I think that self-reflection is so important, especially right now, because depending on where you are, it can be very trying to be yourself authentically. Thinking about your work, and you do more like professional development training kind of work, right? For a nonprofit, you're educating people in the nonprofit realm. What do you think that the educational community can do to be more inclusive of queer people?
I think they shouldn't be too afraid to collaborate with LGBTQI organizations. There's so much more to learn, and we don't just stand for queer rights. Queer rights is also like human rights. It's so many more fundamental things we share together. So I think we should just not be too scared and be more like optimistic about how we can learn more perspective from each other. Because I think many people in organizations and workers in society want the same thing, but we just have different perspectives, and those can be very good to share.
Absolutely. I think that listening to perspectives, just like we were talking about earlier, it's so important. It's just hard right now to have those conversations. Mind-boggling. At this point in the episode, we are winding down, and so we've got a question from one of our listeners. Today's question comes from Brittany from South Carolina, and Brittany asks, with kind of education being so difficult right now, why stick around?
Because think about the first place why you choose to do it, why you want to be educational, and think about that and how much passion, and think about your strength within, and think about doing it for yourself, because that's what you wanted to do. And we can't just give up because it gets tough, because we faced tough times before in society, and we faced them, and we have succeeded in many things.
Absolutely. I love one thing particularly that you said, especially in the education field, a lot of people are like, think about your students, think about the people that you are working for, essentially. And you said, think about yourself and why you wanted to do it in the first place. And I think that's so important because there's so much messaging that's telling people that we're doing it for someone else. This is a selfless, like educating people is selfless. You're giving of yourself, but you're also giving to yourself. This is something you wanted to do. You had a reason to do it, and you need to like focus back in on that why. So I think that's stellar. I wish that more people saw that. If you at home would like to have your question read on the podcast, then please click the Ask a Queer Educator link on any of your podcast streaming devices. Vin Phillips, I just want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today. We've been trying to connect folks for a week or two, and we finally get to sit down together, and that just makes me so happy. And I love your insight coming from Sweden and representing a new country on the podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Giselle. It's my pleasure.
Today, we talked about how embracing a spectrum of queerness can enrich your personal growth, the importance of supporting others while respecting their boundaries, and practical advice for advocating for inclusivity in education and beyond. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Teaching While Queer. Connect with fellow queer educators and your favorite guests on our online community at www.teachingwhilequeer.org. New community members receive a free resource focused on creating an inclusive classroom environment. Have a great day.